I'm Brian V, and this is Why We Work. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Mr. Andrew Chesnutt. He is the CEO of Nickel City Learning Solutions. He is an instructional designer that helps companies get up to speed. He helps them in medical, finance, management, and also e-learning. And what I want to know from him is how he gets these managers on the same page to realize that they need something to be more competitive. But also, I want to know what he does for the employees who may be scared to make mistakes and get on to e-learning and other forms of training within their company. So join me today with Andrew Chesnutt. I'm Brian V, and this is Why We Work. And as I just mentioned, we have the pleasure of speaking with Andrew Chesnutt. Good day, fine sir.
Good day. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderfully well. The wee hours of 5 in South Korea, and you are around that time in the PM out in New York. Yes?
About 4:30. That's correct. Yes. Yeah. It's always fun, and no matter how much I get into major time zone differences, because I have colleagues that are in Sydney and Bali, so I have major time differences I deal with on a regular basis. It's still always a bit of a challenge, and always a bit intriguing to figure out that it's tomorrow morning for you.
It's
Never think
really, I
about it.
mean, I don't know how much experience someone needs to just say, okay, I get it. We're all on different sides of the world, but it's something hard to adjust to, especially scheduling. I mean, you probably come across
Mm,
this with your work in scheduling people and figuring out where they are. I'm just waking up, you're just finishing your day, and it's just something. I don't know how much experience you need in life just to understand it all, but
true
it's
story.
taking me a while.
Oh yeah.
Andrew, would you do me a favor? I just did an introduction to you as being the CEO of Nickel City Learning Solutions, and could you give us a little bit of an introduction of yourself, and we'll go back in time a bit.
Sure, absolutely. So I have been what one client of mine called an educational engineer for the past 15 years. I've been in business for about 4.5 at this point now as well. My goal and my mission for my company is to bring great training to companies. A lot of times training is something that companies either, it's not anything that really makes you money in most situations. They really don't think about it as something they just have to do, or something that's required legally, depending on what sort of an industry they're in. Especially the banking industry, they want to see compliance training. And for me, I like to bring a storytelling aspect to it. I also like to bring some brain science to it as well. So that way we can make training that's effective and training that learners will actually want to sit through and will get a lot out of. And yeah, so that's a little bit about
So,
me.
Andrew, before we get into some questions about what you do today,
Mhm.
being from the States, I get a sense that a lot of people, unless you've done something on your own, tend to start working around the age of 15, 16,
Mhm.
17. What was your first job? What was the first thing? It may not have been a legit job. You might have been selling lemonade or sports cards or something, but what was something that got you out of the house, or maybe you're in the house making some money?
My first job, I worked for a supermarket that's no longer around anymore because that was a very long time ago. Yeah, I was a stock boy, and it was the first job that it was in walking distance from my house.
Hmm.
It was relatively easy. Yeah, it was an interesting experience.
How old were you?
Really, I had to have been about 15, 16.
Okay. What
Yeah,
got
and I
you out
worked
of the
there.
house?
Um, so, as far as like
Why did you
extracurricular,
go?
why?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
why did I?
Why did you do it? Yeah.
That's what you did. You
Hmm.
started working at 15 or 16. You started working for somebody. You got a job. You did your thing. I was using it to pay for textbooks to build up a stash so I could pay for textbooks when I went to university.
No, you
And
weren't. Really?
I'm sorry. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I didn't
Really?
have a
I mean,
terribly incredible life. I didn't really have this like wild, crazy life. I was
no,
pretty,
I mean, that's
pretty bland.
amazing. That's amazing. I waited for my student loan to come in to pay for my books. I don't know. I mean, that's looking into the future for you. Like,
It was by a couple of years. Yeah, it was. I had a really, and I was not a terribly adventurous child. So, that was my, it helped.
well, no,
So I was there for about 2 years, and it worked. Yeah,
that's
it was.
really good of you, though.
Yeah, it taught me a lot. So it was interesting. It didn't necessarily teach me everything that my parents wanted it to teach me,
Mhm.
about hard work and due diligence, or but not necessarily about that, but about go to work, do the safe thing, do that. What it taught me is, and over my career, taught me that I really wanted to be in business for myself, and that was the environment that I thrived in.
Being a
And while I
stock
did well
boy
with the
taught you
jobs,
that.
yes, it did. Yeah, it was
Wow.
the place I was at. The management was um, challenging,
Mhm.
to put it in terms. And so it was interesting. I had been through kind of I'd had some really good managers in my career, but I've also had some that really showed that I need to not be working for somebody else. And so for me, I always had that entrepreneurial spirit and never
Mhm.
actually really did anything with it until I was in my late 30s when I started this company that I have now. And I've become a very strong advocate for people going out on their own and forming their own business. I love teaching people, how to start their own business and that sort of thing.
So
It's
after being a stock boy, and I mean, I
Mhm,
find that incredible that you at 15 or so were saving money for your books for
mhm,
university. I mean, I don't want to paint all teenage kids now with the same brush because I know it doesn't exist. It's not true that, you know, lot are relying on the government. Some are just staying home playing
mhm,
video games. Some play on their phone all day. But the idea of being 15 years old and having the wherewithal saying, okay, I'm going to go to college. And not only that,
mhm,
I'm going to have to pay for my books. Like, so
yeah,
you were on the right track. And I'm not saying that you're saying that you were on that perfect track the whole time, but the idea of
mhm,
saving, knowing that in advance that you were going to have to save up for this at such a young age shows that
mhm,
you had some wits about you that I certainly didn't. And that makes me enjoy doing this podcast to find out people who just had a different frame of mind, a different point of reference than I did. And I certainly didn't have that. And so I appreciate that. And I hope people who listen know that there are some young people out there that can do these things and they can plan for their future. And I mean, I was speaking to a finance guy yesterday, and he's just talking about what I wish I would have known is just starting to save in high school. Right, just
mhm,
save, the compound interest, and save your money and save for 20 years or so, and bam, you'll be well off. And I mean, you had that same idea, whether you invested, but you invested short term for your books.
mhm,
For
mhm.
college, how did you decide to go to college, or what was you said you understood you wanted to be in business and you had the entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah.
What guided you there?
Um, as far as university is concerned, so I have I was what you like to call a super senior. I've been through a few different degrees. Finally, ended up getting a bachelor's degree in business admin because it just seemed like the perfect solution at the time. But I started off in electrical engineering, took a veer off towards um, let's see, yeah, the next one was computer science, then went into theology for a bit, then decided on a bachelor's degree. So I think part of it was interesting, even though early on, it being at 16 and saving for college, a lot of that was my parents who said, it's probably a good idea you do this.
Hmm.
But I had no expenses when I was a kid, so it was not terribly difficult to do it. Not like I was really missing the money at all. And so kind of stumbled around a little bit trying to find exactly what I wanted to do. And so I'll kind of take you through the how I ended in the career I'm in, and
Yeah.
then kind of go from there. But yeah, just really couldn't figure out. I always had a job, but it was kind of standard, not minimum wage, but I was a waiter for a while, and
Yeah.
had just kind of an experience of going through working for a lot of other people. um, and I lived in Toronto for a year. Lived in Cleveland, Ohio for about seven. Then when I moved back to Buffalo, my hometown, I really had to get a job. I was looking for what I at the time called my future previous employer. It was just supposed to be a McJob, just
Andrew,
something.
Andrew, so you're saying you moved and had different experiences with jobs, and
Yeah.
did you have a longing to go back home? Or, I mean, there's songs, there's stories about people that, they try to, I mean, you went to Canada. right? So you're from the
Uh-huh.
States and you
Yeah.
went to Toronto. So that's a big shift. That's a
Yeah.
big move, right? I know it's not
That is.
very far, but you're going to a different country to try something. Then you're going to Ohio. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
then so
Yeah.
you're going around, and I did something similar. And for you in university, I started with computer science. That was way over my head. I went to business, right? And then I did theology as well.
Oh,
So it's very
nice.
similar. And I'm on the other side of the world, still having that longing. So I'm just wondering, like,
Yep.
it's something I like to jump into what people do now and promote that. But that path along the way is what I think highlights the humanity of us and not really knowing and the uncertainty, because we can jump through a decade and say, well, I went from this to this. Well, what was going on through there? So what brought you back home? And, did you have your head between your legs? Like, oh, I've done that. I tried,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
mom, I really tried. I went to the West Coast and then I came back. And so what
Yep.
was going through your mind, and when you finally came home and you realized you need to get a job also?
hmm I've always had this wanderlust, and I've just loved to go travel to do other things. I went to Peru before COVID hit. Actually, I was about a week shy of being stuck in Peru for 6 months, which I doubt would be like a bad thing at
No,
all.
not
But
not at all.
I've just liked traveling. I've liked going around, and so Toronto was interesting. I was 18. I had just gotten
Mhm.
out of just moving out of the house. I'm like, let's do this. Cleveland was the same way. It's like, "Oh, let's try this. Let's see if that works." And it's always just been trying to get a new experience, trying to see what's going on, trying to just get a new perspective. So when I moved back to Buffalo, I wouldn't necessarily say that my tail was between my legs, but it was definitely time.
Mhm. Yep.
It was time
Yep.
to move back home and kind of regroup for a while. I needed that grounding for being back at home. None of them were bad experiences. I just needed that grounding for being back at home and being centered in a space that I grew up in. So I ended up getting a job at a call center. And within 3 months of working there, I started the training department. Now, I had been a
Mhm.
professor's assistant back in college when I was doing my electrical engineering associate's degree. So I had already been in training and teaching
Yep.
to some
Yep.
extent. So I had some experience at it, and I always really liked it. And so yeah, I went in, absolutely fell in love with the industry,
The idea
and
of
so I was
training.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely loved it. Just really found my passion. It was funny. I had this one person who really did not like me very much, who even said, "You're a really good trainer." So I figured that's one of those I'd like to thank the academy moments. If people that are not really a fan are saying you're a
Yeah.
really good trainer, you've definitely found your calling, right? Uh, so yeah, it just turned into this great career. Again, it's been 15 years at this point. And yeah, I love every part of it. I love learning. I love teaching. Sometimes to the chagrin of my family, I go into trainer mode. But yeah, it's been something I've absolutely loved.
So you're a freelance trainer, is that an
I,
instructional designer? So you're no longer with the
yeah,
call center, you're doing your own training for businesses.
that's right. I ended up, so the call center laid me off. They reorganized their entire training structure,
Yep.
everything. And so they laid off every instructional designer they had on staff, as from at the corporate high level, not the call center level. So what they and I went around trying to find. I think I put in about 300 applications for jobs, and nothing. I had a couple of temp here and there, but nothing really significant. And by that point, it was pretty obvious that I needed to not, that I needed to go out on my own. It was pretty obvious, and it was becoming more and more obvious every day that I needed to really be out on my own. And so I decided that I was going to do this, and so I gave myself 4 months and said, let's see if I can find a client or two, see if I can, at least make enough to keep my head above water, and go from there. And I did. I found two clients. One of them is still a client of mine to this day.
Sorry, Andrew, you
April
had
of
the
'85.
you had the experience in the call center of training and also in university and college.
Yeah. Mhm.
But where did you get the inspiration or the idea to train yourself, like to train these companies yourself? Did you see that happening somewhere else? Were you able to um, saddle back off somebody else to see that they were doing it freelance and then you can also make this a business? What was something that you were able to see and then model?
I I kind of just went for it.
Okay.
I fortunately, when I was really early on, I knew that I needed to seek out some sort of a group to be associated with to kind of help me along this path. And I found one very, very early on. I think it was about a month into being, after I incorporated, it was very shortly thereafter I found a group, and I'm still a part of them, of online learning professionals. And most of them are
Mm-hmm.
freelancers.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I say almost all of them are freelancers. Met a lot of wonderful people in there. Met a lot of people that helped me a lot, kind of to mentor me into being a freelancer and what that is, and really opened my eyes to a whole different section because I was a corporate trainer. I wasn't used to higher ed. I had some experience with higher ed
Mm-hmm.
as a PA, but hadn't had a really deep understanding of exactly how that worked. And so, yes, I did get on with a group. Yeah, and that's one thing I continue to do is I come from the mindset that I can learn a lot from people, and so I tend to, or I like to mimic what people who are farther along in their careers do,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because if it's worked once, there's a good chance it's going to work again. Yeah, so I tend to do that now too. I'm part of a few masterminds. Actually, going to be going to San Diego in the end of October for a mastermind. Yeah, so that's been a trend that
Conference of
I've
some
loved to
sort,
do at
yeah.
first. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what does your work consist of? You touched on it at the beginning. So what would a
hmm
typical interaction be with a company, maybe initial, opposed to one of the clients that you've been with for so long? But how
hmm
would it work between you and them?
Well, there's two main parts to what I do, and the first one is sort of a traditional training. I have partnered with a company in Canada to do off-the-shelf training, but I also do custom e-learning. It was something I've done for so long that it's my main bread and butter at this point,
Can you
and I've enjoyed it.
define e-learning?
Generally, it's across a bunch of industries. It's just like if you've ever had to go through corporate training, then you have to go through probably some level of online learning. That's the type of learning that I generally do. I
Mhm.
have done university learning as well, especially post-COVID. Most universities had some sort of an online component. I think they're doing a lot more now.
Mhm.
I don't really focus on that space much anymore, but I have done it before. And so that's the online learning that I'm talking about. So e-learning interactive is the main course. Like I have one client that does OSHA compliance here in the States, and they make these little 5-minute modules that they can go and deploy to construction crews. And they have a little story behind them and some interaction that has to happen to show learning. So that's mainly what I do. And that's one part. The second part, I help entrepreneurs to create online training or to create training all online, in person, either one of the two, and to be able to tell their stories
Mhm.
and use that for things like coaching programs. And that's something that I'm getting more into at this point, and I'm trying to steer my company in that direction because I find it fascinating to hear how these people and some of them are very well off, have been incredibly successful in business, how they started, and starting to hear some of the commonalities amongst them, and being able to help them tell that story is a really fascinating process, and I love doing it.
So you're an instructional designer, so are you
I am.
designing these e-profiles or e-learning
Mhm.
environments, or are you just
Yes.
holding their hands and bringing them through the process that has already been created?
So I'm the one that actually facilitates creating the training. If you think about the old analogy of CPA, and you go to do your taxes at the end of the year, or a chartered accountant, and so there used to be this old adage where you'd go with your shoebox full of receipts and give them the receipts and say, "Here, you
Mhm.
figure it out."
Mhm.
So you have the information. Now you need to sort it out and put it in a way that somebody else would be able to understand. And that's generally what I do with information.
Mhm.
I will take somebody's idea, their their idea, the information that they have as a subject matter expert, and put it into a format that people will be able to understand. and that will be measurably understandable. So being able to show, but at the beginning of the course and the end of the course, what the additional information that has been effectively transferred is.
So in some ways, you're developing a curriculum.
Absolutely, that's exactly what it is. Most universities have instructional designers on staff, and that's how they develop new programs and things like
That's a
that.
difficult job you have.
It can
You
be.
know,
It can
I'm
be a
just trying to get my
challenge.
head
Yes.
around it, but it's a difficult job you have. You can go into a company that next to nothing
hmm
about particular,
Yeah.
and they're like, "Here's my shoebox, and
Yes.
make it pretty now,
Yes. Yeah.
right under
Here,
this,
sort this out.
this
Yeah.
amount of
Yeah.
money." So yeah,
Yes.
that's quite
Yeah.
difficult. And then so you have a really interesting middle person
hmm
position between the managers and the employees who
Yeah.
tend to be the ones that are the recipients of this, shoebox effect.
Yes. Very true.
So how do you, even before that, what is difficult? I mean, it seems like a really difficult job. I appreciate teachers and working for companies that have these programs, but someone had to make them, someone had to implement them, and we're
Mhm.
just like pressing
Yeah.
buttons and complaining if it doesn't take us to the right spot when we want to. But someone had to put in the work to get it there. So what is most
Yeah.
difficult about what you do?
Keeping it engaging, especially if I'm doing compliance training. Sometimes I'll do banking compliance training, and it is the dullest, dullest information. And so keeping it engaging is one thing, and that's why one of the things that I specialize in is storytelling through training.
Mhm.
So instead of just dumping information on somebody and just saying, "Here you go, good luck with that," trying to actually teach through telling a story and making it relevant, and that's really the easiest way I've found to keep somebody engaged and to make training not terrible. Because there's some training out there which is, you can tell that management has just sort of said, here, just check this box and go through it. We don't care how bad it is. We don't care how much you learn. We just need to do this so that our compliance people are not upset with us. But that's one thing I really try to work very hard on, is making sure that everything that we do is engaging and is relevant. Yeah.
How do you find it to stay engaged if you're given a bunch of compliance information? How difficult is that if you're like, okay, here's another program, and is that a difficult, you know, focus to keep when you're just given some of the same? Because I can see it's difficult, but I can also see
Mhm.
that it could be for you maybe a little draining if you're getting, here's some rules and regulations and you guys need to, do this by the end of the week. And is it hard for you to stay engaged and continue to enjoy what you're doing?
Can I answer that question by saying that there was a single line item in my budget for Starbucks?
That helps.
Exactly right. Being somewhat caffeinated really does help during those
Yeah.
moments. But honestly, for me, it's more of a challenge accepted moment.
Hmm.
I love the challenge of that, to see if there is a way that I can put this information in a format that will be engaging. One of the worst trainings that I do is FDA compliance training, because everyone has to go through it every year. And if you've been working for a pharmaceutical company for 30 years, you've been through this 30 times. And the information does not change very, very much over the years. And so, so part of that is telling stories. I always love to show like horror stories, things
Hmm.
that the FDA compliance officers have found inside of pharmaceutical companies, going, this is why we don't do this.
Hmm.
And that tends to make it more engaging, no matter how many times you go through that training, seeing something different each time, and seeing how, some disaster zone, just some of them have been,
Is there a
that really helps.
field
It keeps people engaged. It
is
makes, this is why we don't do this. It keeps it relevant for them.
Is there a field that you enjoy working in out of the ones that you're in, like medical, financial, and management? Is there one that you prefer that is kind of intriguing to you in most of what you do?
Finance.
Finances.
Absolutely. I started off working for in the mortgage and banking industry, and so it's something that I've been working in for a while. Right now, I work with a client who does kind of uh, works outside of the banking industry, so basically freeing people from banks and not having to use banks, or creating your own. There's ways to do that as well. And it's really, that part fascinates me
Hmm.
because it's outside the lines. And I really love coloring outside the lines, and showing people that there's another way to do something. I think comes part and parcel with my job as a trainer, is being able to show people things that they hadn't thought about before, or things that they may or may not have been exposed to, and how this outside the lines thinking has really helped. To go back to the experience of, I was 16 and I had a job. Technically, I was doing everything right. You get a job, you work there for a certain amount of time, you save your money, you do this, you do this. But that doesn't necessarily have to be the only formula. And I've learned that throughout the years that there's other ways to do this as well. And you don't necessarily have to use this old formula that works. I mean, it's not bad, but that there are other interesting ways. And that's part of what I like about teaching, is just opening people's minds to these new things, and hoping that by opening their mind to some of these new things, that they can really edify their lives with it.
Speaking of opening people's minds, Andrew, what would you like people to understand? Because I don't think I ever really appreciated until speaking to you now the task that is before doing some online learning or learning something in your company of the person who's there setting it up. So, is there anything that you would like people to understand about your job so that maybe they can have a better appreciation of what and especially if you're making with storytelling and bringing
Mhm.
some of the background stories to it, you're trying to make it more interesting, which you
Yes.
probably are. Is there something that you would like people to understand so that they can have a better appreciation of what their employer is putting in front of them or what they're doing a year after year after year?
Um, Yeah, I think the number one thing that I'd like people to understand is that we are really trying our best to make it not dull. Sometimes the information that we're given is very difficult, and so there's a lot of tricks that we will use to try to get people engaged, to try to not make training quite as dull as it has been. So we really do try hard at it. We don't like bad training at all. It's not something that is. Yeah, we don't like it any more than others do, and so we do try to make it as engaging as possible. Yeah,
Where
sometimes it's very difficult.
I could imagine. I mean, some of these manuals that they have are, I mean,
Yeah,
dinosaurs
yeah.
and ancient. Where do employers tend to need the most help? So when
Understanding the value of training,
just
understanding the value of training.
understanding the complete value that it brings to the company.
Yeah, yeah. So training is not a cost center, or training is a cost center. We don't have. There's no um, financial benefit often. This is something we just have to do.
Mhm.
And so a lot of management, I see a lot of management doing things like, well, we're just going to get this training done as cheaply as possible because we don't want to spend a huge budget on it. And it really, you end up just wasting money because it doesn't really, it's not, the training would not be effective if it's not well designed. And learners don't want to sit through training that's not well designed. It doesn't do management any good because you don't have, it's either not measured, the amount of knowledge is being transferred is either just not being measured or it's being ineffectively measured. And it is a waste of time to do training that is really not well thought through. And I think that's one thing that management just does not think about, is the intangible asset that training is.
And
Yeah, and I think
employees
that's
can sense that too.
very much,
Right, if the
very, very much.
management's like, "Oh, okay, well, did you do your training? Did you okay, or
Mhm,
sign this paper and get it?" And if they don't care, employees are gonna care less, and that's just, it's not
mhm,
like,
yeah.
generally speaking, employees have other things to do, and then being
Hmm.
set aside time to do this other thing, which seems to have little benefit, or the people above them don't really care, it takes
Hmm.
even more from it.
Very true. Very true. There was a quote, and I can see if I can find it at some point on how to. Yeah. So this was a quote by Edwin Emery Slauson, um, who said, "Lecturing is the mysterious process by which the contents of the notebook of the professor are transferred through the instrument of the pen to the notebook of the student without passing through the mind of either." And And I think that that's really the mindset of training in some companies, where it's just this, let's just do this. Let's just get this done to check a box and be finished with it.
It's
And
so true.
unfortunately, I think that's more common. Yeah.
I'm a teacher here in South Korea, and I see and I didn't appreciate it as much, but when you see other people do it, I have students taking notes, right?
Yes.
Like if
Yes.
you write something on the board or on a screen and they're taking notes, but all they're really doing is just looking and writing what it is.
Hmm.
And I'm like, you're not even reading it. You're not even taking a moment, because I know when it gets home, you're not going to say, hey, what
Hmm.
should I do now? And that's
Yeah.
true. It's
Yeah.
just going from, this piece of paper to this piece of paper and not transferring through a thought
Your
process.
mind at all.
What is,
Reminds me,
go ahead.
the quote reminds me of a calculus course I took back in the day. And it was Calculus 2 course. So it's one of the most difficult parts of calculus. And there were, I would say, 200 of us in a classroom with this teacher who was this older Asian gentleman who was very nice. And you could tell he was brilliant. He really knew what he was talking about. But quite honestly, was one of the worst teachers I've ever had. And he would start at one end. There were four blackboards across, and he would start at one end and just furiously start writing notes, talking at the blackboard the entire time, only stopping long enough to debate with himself whether or not what he was going to write was a note, a suggestion, or a comment, and then would start back up again. And by the time he was at the end of the fourth blackboard, you're just furiously getting down, because then he'd start at the other end and start erasing all the way across. And this is exactly how the course went all
Yeah.
semester.
Hmm.
By the time we were finished with that course, um, the highest score was a 98%, but that was a curved 98%. The actual score was a 46. They had to curve it so steeply just
Hmm.
to get even half the class to pass, because none of them would. Not a single one would
You
pass
guys had a
if
lot
they
of
didn't really
notes,
heavily curve it.
but nothing
A
up
lot.
here.
Absolutely nothing. Yes. And so, and that was, I guess, a really great moment of that, passing from the board to the notebook without anything going through your head.
And that's that is the fault of managers not appreciating the value of training. What do you find is, for employees, something that's setting them back the most? Because I know I read something that you wrote about making mistakes, and employees are fearful of making mistakes. What do you
Mhm.
find? Because they're going into a new situation, maybe some compliance training is whatever, but if you're doing some e-training, especially with COVID, people are moving more to online stuff, and some people are not used to it. I mean, you see that with Zoom type things, and people are like, oh, how do I figure this out?
Mhm.
Are you finding a constant stream of mistakes people are scared to make?
Yeah, just to go back to the Zoom thing, I think there's two catchphrases for 2020. And the first one is "you're frozen," and the second is "you're on mute." I think those are the two catchphrases for 2020, thanks to Zoom. Uh, um, the biggest issues I do see a lot of people being scared to make mistakes. That's part of learning, is making a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
It's an effective way to learn is just to go out there, do it, see what happens, not caring too much about the output, but just let's see what happens. It's how kids learn. If you watch a kid when they're trying to learn how to walk, they're sometimes it's just, I'm going to stand up, and they get up, and it's like, oh crap, what do I do now? But they did it. It was that experience, and they may fall down and fail, or they may start walking again. But there's that process they have to go through to be able to kind of try a theory, see if it works, if it does, and then change path depending on whether or not what they did work. So definitely being scared to fail, or being scared to not succeed at something the first time, is definitely a big issue. The other part is not really valuing learning.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to a job at a fast food restaurant, you're not really going to value the training that you're getting just enough to, or you will just enough to be able to do your job competently. But not understanding that you can actually get a lot more out of this. It's just not just go in, show up, and do your shift and leave. I think there should be a lot more value in learning itself, not only learning for jobs, but learning for the sake of learning. For me, I'm always in the middle of something that I'm learning. And even after 15 years in this industry, I'm still learning things about the industry. I'm still engaging in constantly trying to increase my game, if you will, as far as the company is concerned.
Yeah, I guess it's trying not to be stagnant.
Yes.
Right. No
Yeah.
matter your
Yeah.
position. I mean, I was speaking to someone the other day, and it's even if you have an aspiration, you have a job, but you have an aspiration for something else. Well, research that on the side, and that's going to maybe give you that motivation. You're like, hey, I can do this job well while I'm looking for something else, rather than being a deadbeat in the office or in the fast food restaurant. You
Mhm.
sound like this would be a very busy sort of ordeal for you when you have clients and you're trying to get this training package engaged or
Mhm.
implement it. How do you stay productive when you have so much on your plate?
I had to learn a very hard lesson about delegation, and that I
Hmm.
am only one person and I am not a superhuman. I tend to be a very type A personality, and that has been one of my the biggest things I had to learn the hard way, and I failed a lot of times at it. But now having a team around you is
Hmm.
absolutely critical to being good in business. A team that you trust enough to give them tasks and then come back later when they're done instead of micromanaging. Small business owners are really bad at being able to kind of delegate and then allow the professionals to do their work. So for me, it's hiring well, so making sure that when I don't hire employees, I usually have subcontractors, but
Hmm.
I have a team of subcontractors I work with regularly, and I built up relationships with them. They're all very, very good. And I make sure that when I have somebody on my team, these people are really at the top of their game. And then I say, here you go, here's the task, go do this, and then let them do it. And oftentimes they surprise me with how good the content that I get back is. Um, so I'd say that was having a good team around you, having a good tribe around you as well for support. I have some really great mentors. I have some really great coaches behind me that help me in my business. Um, Being in business for itself is a very unique circumstance. A lot of people think they know what it's like, but unless you've actually been through
Hmm.
it, it is very different than most people's perception of being in business for yourself. There's a reason I have no hair. Yeah.
And also the idea is, to find another client so you can have,
Yeah.
the mountain effect of, okay, well, everything is good now, but, eventually that client's not going to need me or not for the rest of the year, not until next year. And then you need to find another one. So there's that search aspect to your position as well. Are you uh, where do you place your hands in the whole process? Is it just the beginning? Is it the middle, the end of a particular training session? I mean, that might be the temptation too of wanting to be in all aspects of it. So are you from beginning to end, or is it just the implementation of a training session?
I monitor and I steer the ship, and that's
Okay.
as the CEO, that's my job is to steer the ship. So while if I need to, I will jump in and and take a project if I have to. If something's going wrong, I'll jump in and help or lend my expertise as needed. Generally, I am there for the very beginning to onboard the client. It's nice to have one face to look at, and then introduce the rest of the team as they become relevant to the course itself or the project itself. I monitor, so at least weekly, I check in with my team and the various projects that are going on, so that way I can see what's going on, what's going well, what isn't going well, maybe things that I need to intercede on if needed. And then at the end, making sure that everything has been buttoned up and ready for delivery. But really, I trust my team, and my job is just to be the captain to make sure that my team has what they need to be successful, and that they have the guidance necessary to be able to take kind of, I don't necessarily want to say the easiest path, but not
Yeah.
to run into obstacles. Um, and so that's my role, is to have that higher level, going out and spreading the name of the company in things like podcasts like we're doing today. That is in marketing and as well as innovation as well. If there's something really cool that I want to see the team start working on or direction to go, I'll trailblaze it, come up with a procedure for it, and then roll it out to them. So that's the area that I love to work in as well. It's something that I'm really good at and something that really brings me, I have a huge passion for.
Andrew, as an instructional designer, what is your favorite tool that you use or something that allows you to be most efficient in your work?
A whiteboard. Honestly, I
That's
love whiteboards. It allows me to get my brain onto paper.
yeah.
Sometimes my brain does not have the world's most linear pathways
Hmm.
to getting these, and sometimes what we do is a very creative process. And so there's times when I just need to dump as much information as
Yeah.
possible onto a whiteboard. I have a virtual assistant, and some of my staff members are used to my brain dumps and kind of how that works. It's just sort of like a fire hose. But sometimes just getting a whiteboard, getting it down
Hmm.
onto paper. Whiteboards, I think, are easier. I can wipe things off and erase and move as I need to. But yeah, I'd say that's the number one tool that I love using, and that helps me the most is a whiteboard.
Thinking about this podcast and why we work, what is a tip that you have thinking back of being a stock boy or some of the paths that you have taken to get where you are? What would be a top tip that you have for listeners as they get into work or change a career from
Mhm.
something that they're maybe not liking so much into something that might be even their passion or something within their talents?
Mhm.
A
I have
top
two.
tip. Yeah.
Well, I have two that I really live by. The first thing is always make sure that what you are doing is a passion that you have. That way, you will never work a day in your life.
Hmm.
I love going to work, even in the bad times. I love what I do. I love that process. I love it. You know, innovating in learning. I love trying to figure out how to teach somebody a difficult piece of information. And the second thing is just because it's worked or just because it's worked for a lot of people in the past doesn't mean it's the right path for you.
Hmm.
We've been taught for many years, you know, go to work there for 30 years, retire on a pension, and go forward. You know, I don't think that paradigm is working anymore, and especially after the current situation that we have, I think it's going to be a number of years before we start to get back on our feet again financially, especially here in the States. And I think it's going to very significantly change the way that we do business so that that old paradigm does not work anymore. It hasn't been working for years. I think it's going to be even worse now. And I think there's a lot more control over your life. So as an independent contractor, as a freelancer, somebody who owns a business or a small business, I think you have a lot more control over your life. I mean, you know, my boss isn't going to fire me one day unless I end up with a multiple personality disorder. I'm
You're
directly
fired.
responsible for
No,
everything that
I'm
happens.
not.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah,
need
I
a
try not to
raise.
argue
No,
with
you
myself.
can't get a raise.
Try not to argue with myself, at least in front of staff, right?
Yeah.
You know? But I think that's one. You know, you have a lot more control in your life, and also if you're in a situation where you know a client may not be a good fit for you, that I've had to walk away from clients where it's like
Mhm.
this is not working for either of us. So having that control over your life really is helpful, and I think with the economic situation that's going to happen after COVID, I think that's going to be even more important is to have that control to be able to pivot when you need to.
I think the first one you mentioned of loving and having a passion for what you do, and you saying that you have a passion for it. I mean, it's very important because you are in through the work that you do is in through all of businesses, right? Because
Mhm.
there's always training that's needed. There's always something. So you're in a good, it's not a niche, but it's really important role that you have in a job. So I'm glad that you do have that passion and desire to do what you do. How do you find a work life balance and separating yourself from the work and doing something else to enjoy your time, and
Mm.
what
It
is
is a
something that you do?
it is a constant battle. It
Yeah.
is a constant battle. Um, so one thing I do, bare minimum, 1 day a week off a week. Period.
Yeah.
One, at least one full day. I try to get two, but at least one full day off a week. I don't answer emails or voicemails or anything after a certain time at night. So 8 p.m. Eastern, you're not going to get a hold of me unless there's something else. Unless there's a
Mhm.
reason for it,
Mhm.
you're not going to get a hold of me. You're not going to get a
Mhm.
hold of me before 8 o'clock in the morning. It's just
Mhm.
not going to So I have that time to myself where I can decompress.
Yeah.
Um, and then I take time throughout the week. If I feel like I need some downtime, I will take it, and giving myself permission to take that time for myself, knowing that if I don't take that time, I am less efficient. I'd rather be able to schedule those moments when I don't, when I have some downtime or when I'm not being productive, if you will, in my work life, rather than get a massive case of burnout and have it done for me. Because there's going to be a point when your body just shuts down and
Yeah.
your brain shuts down and you're not going to get anything accomplished anyway. I'd rather plan that. And so, if there's times when, like this evening, I know it's been a really long day for me. So for me, this evening, after we're finished with this, I'm going home and I am going to work on something I like.
Hmm.
Something that's not really that's related to work, but not, the fun projects that I have on my back burner that may not be for a client, but just interesting stuff. I'm actually going to go working on some marketing when I'm done, because that's something that I just like to do, is coming up with interesting marketing campaigns and stuff. So yeah.
What is the funnest project you've done? Maybe even with the advent of technology and the advance of even with COVID, where people having to learn from home or more on computer based. What is one of the most interesting projects you had to work on?
I have a client who teaches how to use a life insurance policy as a banking system, and it's a higher level. It takes a lot of work to teach people how to do this, because it's so different than what people um, are used to thinking. Usually, you
Hmm.
put your money into a savings account, you get a certain amount. That's it. There's not really, or you put your money into stocks. You do. It's pretty wash, rinse, repeat. Um, that is probably one of the most fun projects I've worked on, because it's so different.
Hmm.
It's a massive challenge. You're working against a lot of cognitive dissonance, because when somebody sees something that's outside their um, viewpoint of the world, outside their kind of view of the world, it can be very difficult to train around that, because that's a massive wall that they hit. Oh, well, this doesn't make sense to me, so it's wrong. And that's the immediate thing that they do. So trying to work around that cognitive dissonance is one. Trying to explain this very high level, this high level process in a way that everyone can understand is also something that is a fun project to work on. I love working on it. I've worked with this client for about 3 years building these. The other thing I love working about it is it's teaching somebody something very different. It's something that um, will bring quite a bit of value to someone's life if they are willing to use these systems. It can really be very beneficial for them. And so I always like that as well, when a project has a positive outcome and can significantly and positively affect somebody else's life. Yeah.
As the captain of the ship, the CEO of the company that goes into these places, do you receive a lot of complaints? Not necessarily at the work that you're doing, but just
Hmm.
because you're the easiest target rather than the employees
Yes,
going at the managers or the managers going at the employees. Let's blame Andrew. Do you receive a
that's
lot of that?
well, I think as a CEO of a company, no matter what goes wrong or whether or not I've actually had a hand in it, it's my fault. I am responsible for that. And you really have to have a very, you have to have very thick skin for doing it. Understanding that most of the time, this is just frustration manifesting. The
Hmm.
industry that I'm in can be very, very frustrating. Especially, if you have a client that's just being difficult, or isn't getting information, or I have this really complicated thing that I have to break down to the level that a 5-year-old would understand. That's a very difficult process. Or even making a mistake in business, things like that. And I've made plenty of them. Yeah, you end up being the scapegoat for a lot of things, from both customers and clients, as well as from your internal staff. And that comes part and parcel with being a business owner. While I try to encourage people to be business owners, it is definitely not for the weak. But having a thick skin and understanding where that person is coming from and where this is manifesting. I think there's a really great way to put this. There's a theory called Miller's Law. It was created in the late 50s, mid late 50s, and it says accept everything as the truth, then understand what it's the truth of. So if I were to walk out and say the sky is purple, now your first reaction would be, no, it's not purple, it's blue. That's wrong.
Hmm.
It is suspending that disbelief for a moment and saying, okay, I'm going to accept that as the truth for right now, because I'd like to understand some more about where this person's perspective is.
Perspective is, yeah.
And using that technique and going, okay, this employee is now blasting away at me on Slack here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's step back a second and accept that their feelings are valid and what they're saying is the truth. Now let's dig a little bit deeper. It takes the attack mode out of you. You're not in fight or flight mode anymore. Now you're in, this is a problem that needs to be solved. And it completely changes the entire conversation.
That would help in most relationships.
Mhm. Absolutely. Very, very true. Very
Take
true.
a moment.
Yeah.
Would some of the
Yeah.
problems, some of the feedback you get, or the highest amount of criticism come maybe from the medical profession? I'm just a guess that I talk to doctors, and doctors are there to help people, but I mean, I've watched shows.
Mhm.
It's the administration part that really gets in the way of them doing their job. Where I would think that finance would be, they're all right with these things. They go with the ebbs and flows of life a little bit easier.
So there's not really any one industry that I work in that's worse than the others.
Okay.
The clients that I get the most negative feedback from are ones where they don't. It's a lack of understanding, and so this might be a lack of understanding for what the project was supposed to be. No matter how clear you are, people will always enter into a situation with their own perspective. So sometimes it's, we may have been, I try to be very clear about what will be and will not be done inside of a contract. And I do that so all the parties know what, I like transparency. I want to show exactly what you're going to be getting at the end. Sometimes that doesn't always work, or somebody thinks that thinks they were going to get something when they wouldn't. And they come in with their own perspective. Most of the time it's a misunderstanding. Yeah, I would say almost all the time it's just a misunderstanding, or somebody changes scope in the middle of a project, which then completely changes everything, and can be a mess. And they may get upset about that because it's not. No amount of planning can plan for somebody else's randomness or something else coming up in the middle of a project. I
Speaking of,
actually want to get one of those. I want to
yeah,
get one of the big 1950s sci-fi posters,
yeah.
and just says "the scope that will not die," which I guess a lot of the bad projects that I've been on have been that way, where the scope just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing to this massive beast, and nobody's truly happy when that happens.
Yeah, that could. I can imagine just like some of the difficulty you think of, TV shows like The Office or those types of things, just how bad a culture can be if management is not running it well. And then you implement these other sort of training programs. And as you're saying, is the scope getting bigger, the mission's being lost, the vision's gone.
Mm.
And then
Yeah.
you have a bunch of people running around not knowing, which way is up, but they still need to produce.
True. Very true. And training is usually the first one to see it, because we're usually the first line. When you go into a job, you generally go through training first. And so if there are major gaps in management or there's some other thing, we're usually the first to get it. Yeah.
Andrew, you mentioned planning. So thinking back, what would you wished that you knew starting your working career, your journey with work, that you can implement or let people know now, that if you just knew this one thing, you think it might have helped you along the way a little bit?
Bucking what society says you should do is very much so not a bad thing. And I think people should do it more.
Say that again. Sorry, I missed the first part.
That's okay. Bucking what tradition and what the
Mm-hmm.
culture says
Yep.
you should do is not always a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And having the faith in yourself to be able to say, I may make a massive, massive mistake right now. This might be, a life-altering event, and allowing that fear to take over and to go for kind of the average because you think that's the easiest way out. Um, the easy way out is not always the most fun, and it's not always where you should be.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that's the number one thing I tell myself is, if you feel like you need to go do this, do it. One of the greatest teachers is failure. Failure is another name for learn. And failure is not bad. Failure you can get a lot out of a good or a bad experience. I like to say that everyone is a good example. Some are a good example of what to do. Some are a good example of what
Yeah,
not to do, but
absolutely.
everyone is a good example, and everyone is entitled to that experience. And so if you have a desire to do something and you have a passion to do something and you think that it is right for you and in your gut it feels like the right direction to go, don't listen to others. Do it. I wouldn't say don't listen to others altogether, but I'd say do it.
Yeah,
Don't allow that
absolutely.
fear to take over.
You mentioned, Andrew, mistakes a couple of times. What is one of the biggest mistakes that you've made and learned from?
Oh, recently, at the advice of a company, started a marketing campaign way too early this year. I think I ended up losing over $10,000 on that thing. That was the biggest mistake recently. And it was interesting because I did everything I thought I was supposed to do.
Hmm.
And when I enter a situation, I generally like to think about, um, I like to at least have a limited functional knowledge of what I'm doing. And in this situation, I learned in that situation that no matter how much due diligence you do, no matter if you are going by that mindset of I want to have a limited function of knowledge, so I generally have an idea what's going on and then outsource the rest to the experts. While that's a really good idea, it's not 100% foolproof.
Hmm.
So yeah. And what I learned from that is that there's going to be times when you're going to stumble. It's inevitable. There's no way around it because I did everything I was supposed to do. I did everything I thought I was supposed to do. I followed what the experts were saying. These folks had a track record. It was not any person's fault per se, but it was definitely a learning experience that taught me that no matter what's gonna,
And
you need sometimes you need to learn by not being successful at something.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you said that a moment ago about something you wish you would have known. Just go with the mistakes and learn from them.
Yeah.
Andrew, you
Yeah.
mentioned about going into college, not certain. You took a few changes in the degree you want to get. How much value do you put in education, looking back and even looking forward? I mean, you even mentioned that you
Mhm.
still like to learn things, and that's very important for employees. But could you summarize your idea of the value or how you value education?
I think that education takes a lot of different, or has a lot of different methods. I think that a university education is a good thing. I think it can be.
Mhm.
I do not think it is the only thing. So I I think it depends on where you're in. I think that you should always be learning something. It doesn't matter what it is. There was a time when I was sort of just burned out on learning about um, uh, kind of my industry, and I needed to take a bit of a break. And so I decided I wanted to learn how to sing the Canadian anthem in French. It was just something. It was, and I can now, thankfully. But it was one of those weird things where it's just like always learning something.
Yeah.
So always be curious about your worlds and try to see, try to learn something different. I think that it will give you a completely different perspective of the world that we're in right now. A lot of times we're dominated by this noise that is the media and all of these things that are going on around us. And we're constantly being bombarded by this negative information and a huge amount of information that, to be really frank, is completely irrelevant to our lives.
Hmm.
And you know i I think that we get so caught up in that we really lose sight of some of the really cool things that this world has to give us.
And we think it's
um
important to our lives, and like, oh, I
yeah.
have to know this top news today because my
Hmm.
life will be different
Yeah.
if I don't.
When we don't realize what it is, it's an addiction. And what it
Yeah.
is, whenever I get a text message or an email, or I see news, or I get a high score, we actually use this in training at some point because it can actually be used for good. But you get a dopamine release in your head,
Hmm.
and every time you see something like that, you get another dopamine release, and that can cause an addictive cycle. So that when you're removed from that, dopamine's the feel good, one of the feel good chemicals. It's it makes you get a accomplishment. You get a hit of dopamine when you successfully complete something as well. And we try to use that in training whenever possible because it's a very effective way to get somebody motivated. But when you have this dopamine hit, and then it's gone, you now crave something that will give you that dopamine hit again. And so it becomes this really addictive cycle. The other side is our brains are wired to be, it's called negativity bias. We're wired to be negative. We're wired to see negative influences and negative experiences about 3 times. They're about 3 times as powerful. Remembered about 3 times as better. Much. Let me try that again. Remembered 3 times as well as a positive experience, and that comes from our ancestors. If I'm being chased by a saber-toothed tiger and he's about to get me, I really, really want to remember what I did to get myself into this predicament so I never do that again. It's part of our fight or flight response. And so it had at one point a very good use. And it does still to this day have a really good use. If something negative happens to you, I want to remember what happened so I don't do that again. The downside, though, is that it can be triggered. That's why news is generally negative. They know that we have a better chance of remembering that, and we can get more engaged in it. And then it triggers the fight or flight response. And
So
yeah,
we shouldn't be shocked when we hear so much complaining, is what you're saying.
yes, that's exactly what it is. It is an addictive cycle. And if I can redirect that towards something positive, like learning something new, and it doesn't have to be anything really profound. Just something, constantly learning about people. I love learning about people. It's something that just fascinates me. Or learning how to do something new, or, just learning something it can get us out of that cycle and kind of into a new cycle altogether.
Well, you're leading into one of my final questions, Andrew, of how would you encourage people where they are in their state of work, whether they're disgruntled, they're just starting out, they're nearing the end of their career, and they just maybe need a reminder. They may not even be that discouraged. It's just, why do I work? Why do I have to get up today? How would you cap off an encouragement to them?
I would say that if your response in the morning when you're getting ready for work is, how do I keep going? I would think about the career that you're in, because that's usually that's usually an indicator that you may want to look into something different. When I know that there are some mornings that are really difficult for me, and being in business for yourself is definitely not easy. There are a lot of times when I'm just like, I'm done.
Yeah.
Peace out. I'm
Yeah.
going away. I'm done. There's times when I get close to that, but every morning when I wake up, I know this is my passion. This is what I want to do. Yep, it is awful right now. This is not a good experience. This is an experience that is negative that I'd like to not, I'd like to remember how not to do this again.
Mm-hmm.
But I still have this underlying passion for what
Motivation.
I
Yeah.
do.
Mm-hmm.
And then that is the biggest motivator in the world. So I would say that if it is a constant struggle to get up to out to work, if it is something where it is constantly sucking the energy out of you, and you just feel like you are completely deflated by the end of the day on a very regular basis, it may be time to take a look and see what your passion is, even if it's completely wild. My best friend, it was funny, he had a very good sales job and did very well for himself, was 6 figures, had a really good job. And one day he's like, this job is sucking me dry. And I can remember the day he quit. I saw him his last day. I almost thought something was wrong, because for the first time in the longest time, I saw him calm.
Mm-hmm. Different
And,
person.
he
Mm-hmm.
just totally different. I thought something was wrong. And he's like, no, I finally don't have all this stress anymore. I am not dreading going to work all the time. He ended up getting an associate's degree in brewery management, and I went and started brewing beer, because that was his passion, and he is significantly happier with that decision. And sometimes it just takes a massive life change, right? And you only get one shot at life. Why make it miserable, especially when it comes to your work, which is going to be a massive part of your life. It's a big chunk of your life.
Andrew Chesnutt, CEO of Nickel City Learning Solutions. How can people reach you?
If you would like, you can reach me by email at andrew@nickelcitylearningsolutions.com. You can also go to our website, nickelcitylearningsolutions.com. I am also on LinkedIn. My name is Andrew, and the last name is spelled Chesnutt.
Andrew, one final question.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you work?
I work because I love to help people experience the joys that are the wonderful things that happen in this world and the information that will help them through life. I love transferring that. And I love being able to help people and guide them through that process.
Andrew Chesnutt, thank you, kind sir. And I appreciate and I hope people get a better appreciation of the training that's before them because there's someone behind that doing the work to make it engaging and fruitful for them. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.